Hi guys, MrRoflWaffles here. It has been so long since I've had the opportunity to make a video like this, and let me just tell you right now, I am so goddamn excited. The Black Ops 3 Zombies storyline kind of era holds a really special place in my heart, because not only is that when my channel really started to gain traction, having done YouTube for 6 years prior to that, but it's also when this crazy awesome story that is the Black Ops Zombies sort of saga got even crazier and blew our minds in so many new ways, and I look back on it so fondly, man. Like, seriously, it's just memories that I will never forget, and I'm gonna cherish for the rest of my life, to be honest with you. And that's why today, I'm so excited, like I'm actually a little bit emotional about this, to be able to kind of cast our minds back a little bit towards the Black Ops 3 glory days of zombies, to talk about a new cipher that has been solved, an Easter egg that has just been lying dormant for years that we have finally broken into today, and we get to talk about it and all of the really cool implications, and I'm just so excited. So I've got to give a massive amount of credit here to finsternacht, who's solved this one, and let me just give you a little bit of an understanding of how tricky these things are to solve, okay? There are a handful of ciphers in Black Ops 3 that have been unsolved for a long time, right? And some of them are of such a scale of difficulty that they may actually never be solved. Like, Jason put ciphers into the game back in BO3 that he intended to take a massive amount of time in order to crack, because he wanted to delay the release of that information. And so he basically made stuff that he would have trouble solving himself out into the community to see if we could solve. And so it makes sense that it would take us ages to solve the damn things. But finsternacht has put in the blood, sweat, and tears needed to get through this one. And I mean, I want to talk not only about what's in it from the perspective of today, but I also want to talk about how crazy this would have been had we solved it during BO3, because honestly, it's just mind-blowing. It's so exciting. Alongside finsternacht, I do also want to give credit to Richkiller, who apparently bugged finsternacht all this time to try and solve it. And I think that it really is worth kind of doubling down on the fact that the cipher-solving community are in their own way a beating heart of the zombies community, because they are unearthing things that other people do not have the time, patience, willpower, or skills in order to actually achieve and solve and discover. And so, like, massive props to them. I was a member of the cipher solving community many years ago, but haven't been for a while now because I've been so busy with other things. And honestly, a lot of these guys are a lot smarter than I am and have a lot more know-how with this stuff. So I'm just always enthralled to see new people kind of stepping in and putting their skills to the test and actually managing to crack these things. It's just so good. I could talk about this all day. So this is one of the Gorod Krovy ciphers, and the deciphered ciphertext is as follows. I can't believe I'm saying this. Tony Hale Wrapped. Now, where have I heard that name before? I just can't remember. Anyway, better get to work, as Mr. Wrapped has paid me a handsome sum to investigate and gather the people and items he needs. After I'm done here at Morgue City, I have to head to San Francisco to interview the subjects. The idea of being trapped in that prison gives me the creeps. What? There are so many aspects of this that are interesting. Let's start with Richkiller's own thoughts, because I think that we should sort of start at the source and work our way out, okay? Richkiller says, you can verify the solution using K2 as the first key, and provides a couple of links, which I will also link to in the description down below. But he says that we still don't know the meaning behind the keys. So there is more to figure out here. And the reasoning for this, or the assumption here that's being made, is that last time we figured an exact key, we also figured out a cipher. So these things are intertwined in maybe a similar way to how we could look at things that were in the Zombies comics, where we started to piece together bits of things in the Zombies comics, and together in combination, those gave us answers to other things. What this means is we may have another cipher unlocked in the next couple of days, and it would make sense for that to be the last remaining Gorod Krovy cipher, because there's one remaining on Gorod, one remaining on the Giant, and then 10 on Revelations. But it's unlikely that something in Gorod would affect stuff in the future dropped in Revelations, or at least that's my assumption. And so I think that the idea of this unlocking the last GK cipher is most plausible, and stupidly exciting. And in itself is like a cause for celebration, and I'm sure people will be working hard on that. Now then, let's focus on the message a little bit, because I'm sure a lot of you guys are like, all right, well, Milo, I don't know what the hell was going on in the storyline back in BO3, or I've just kind of forgotten at this point. Can you give me a bit of a recap? We'll start with something that has actually basically already been figured out by HeyLudaYouLikeToEat. I want to give a massive round of applause to Luda for this one because it's so damn cool. Tony Hale Wrapped, the name mentioned at the very beginning of the cipher, ignoring any links to the BO3 zombie storyline for a second, is actually an anagram. Not only is it an anagram, it's not just any old anagram, people. It's an anagram of Nyarlathotep from Lovecraftian mythos. Now you start to realize why it's no surprise that the name was familiar to the reporter in the cipher. Nyarlathotep is described as a tall, swarthy man who wanders the earth, gathering legions of followers through his demonstrations of strange and seemingly magical instruments, and those followers lose focus on the world around them and just get kind of swept up in this new religion almost created by Nyarlathotep. The world then collapses, and the story basically culminates with the narrator in the book becoming part of an army of Nyarlathotep's servants. There are a bunch of really interesting Nyarlathotep quotes, but I'll give you one particular one that I like. There was the immemorial figure of the deputy or messenger of hidden and terrible powers, the black man of the witch cult, and the Nyarlathotep of the Necronomicon. At this point, if that's not already ringing bells in your head as to who this may be alluding to in the zombie storyline, then I'll seal the deal with a couple of pictures, I think. So here are some artists' impressions of Nyarlathotep, and I think that we could probably all agree there is some serious resemblance here, or certainly inspiration that has been imbued inside the Shadow Man, the harbinger of doom for the Apothicons, the kind of frontman, if you like, for that entire alien race set on consuming all. It would make perfect sense for the Shadow Man to be essentially based on the man that did the exact same sort of thing in Lovecraftian mythos, and that was Nyarlathotep. This basically puts a kind of nail in the coffin almost for people's assumptions that the two characters were not necessarily related in a real, like, blood sense or anything like that, but certainly that the Shadow Man is pretty much based on Lovecraftian mythos in a really significant way. Like, we've seen all the influence, we've seen all the similarities, but I mean, this is a direct name anagram for one to the other, and it doesn't really get more on the nose than that. So, hey, Luda, you like to eat? Congrats on a really, really smart use of some anagramming in order to figure that one out. And it also gives us more info about why Mr. Wrapped was a character that we had heard the name of so many times, and like why that name was used in particular. We've always kind of thought, well, Wrapped, it's like Mr. Wrapped, Mr. Rapture. Maybe there's something going on there. Also, Wrapped is an anagram of trap, so maybe there was something in that area, but this, I mean, seals the deal. Tony Hale Wrapped, Nyarlathotep, and who's Mr. Wrapped? It's the Shadow Man. Not only is it the Shadow Man, though, it's the Shadow Man pretending to be a person going about the world collecting strange instruments, which is exactly what I just told you about how Nyarlathotep would operate. And so the Shadow Man is using basically this alias right now of Tony Hale Wrapped, which represents exactly what Nyarlathotep would do, except it's him doing it in his travels around the world, collecting these instruments in the zombie storyline. It's just like, it's perfect. It's artistic. It's beautiful. I love it. I also think it's quite funny that the Shadow Man would refer to himself just at any point in time as Tony. Like Tony the Tiger has the same name as the Shadow Man. Come on now. That's not all though. The next part of the message, Mr. Wrapped has paid me a handsome sum to investigate and gather the people and items he needs. Fine. Known. Understood, already boring sort of thing at this point, almost. I mean, kind of. It's still exciting, just all of this, but that's kind of by the by. The next bit, though, after I'm done here at Morgue City, I have to head to San Francisco to interview the subjects. The fact that that is there, and this came out during Gorod Crovey, they literally had this planned so far in advance, and it blows my mind to this day. It just blows my mind, man. They literally were revealing in Gorod Crovey that the Shadow Man's plans for the reporter didn't end with his activities in Morgue City, as I think we've been assuming all this time. In fact, what happens, which the timeline didn't even disclose, is that December 14th, 1943, the reporter recovers the summoning key. So at this point, he's got the key and he's in cahoots with the Shadow Man who is paying him in order to do that. The next thing he does for the Shadow Man is speak to Stanley Ferguson, who tells him an account of the escape attempts of the prisoners, and the reporter kind of signs all of this off by saying, okay, the next thing I've got to do is go into town and get the details of 3 doozies and a floozy, which are the Shadows of Evil characters that later would obviously be like knocked out and then revived inside Morgue City, and the events of Shadows of Evil would take place, but that's later on. The current status of things is that the reporter still has the summoning key, but he's completed his jobs for the Shadow Man, and so we've not actually been sure, I don't think, what his next move would be, but we now know that the reporter, once he'd transferred the summoning key onto Mr. Rapt, the Shadow Man, would have then gone on himself to Alcatraz to interview the subjects, which presumably would not necessarily, I don't think, be the Mob of the Dead prisoners, because we've already heard their story about that escape attempt, and I mean, the reporter has already stated in the radios, they all got the chair for it, and that was that. Sad to think that 3 guys like that could find themselves swinging. Like, he's conscious of the fact that they're gone, but he's going to Alcatraz to interview the subjects? Sounds to me like maybe he was going to interview people in the transit crew? I'm not 100% sure that's possible, to be honest, and I'd love to get your thoughts in the comments down below, but as far as my understanding of those old events goes, he could totally have just hopped in a portal of some kind set up for him by the Shadow Man, I would presume, and traveled to a point where he would have been able to talk to the transit crew and use that information for the Shadow Man's kind of wishes in some way. However, that would have required the Shadow Man to know that those subjects are in cryostasis in the basement of Alcatraz, which happened at some point prior to the crew turning up in their little jump out of the previous timeline in between Zetsubou and Gorod Krovi. Like at the end of Zetsubou is when they make that little kind of trip. And that's when Dempsey says, like, who are the guys in the pods? And Richmond says, you know, just some old friends. Try not to worry about them, just like you. They are safe. And I don't know if the Shadow Man would have known about their presence there. Like, it would take a little bit of digging in some old zombie story stuff to really kind of drill into whether or not that was the case. But if it wasn't, like, if the subjects were someone else, then could it have just been generic people in Alcatraz? Yeah, I mean, it absolutely could have been. It could have just been some generic experiment in San Francisco, but I feel like that wouldn't be mentioned in a cipher like this. The other option would be potentially the main crew, like the mob crew, but again, the fact that the reporter knows that they're dead suggests to me that he wouldn't then be being teleported over there in order to interview them, and to my mind, I can't think of who else would be a good candidate. Like, there are a couple of other candidates, don't get me wrong, but the most attractive in my mind is the transit crew. And so I would love to hear from you guys, whether or not you think that's plausible or not, and just generally what you think the implications of that are, because it could be that I'm going completely on the wrong track here. But if that is what's going on, it really changes the way that I've certainly been thinking about the Shadow Man's intent and his plans for the transit crew, and also his knowledge of the cycle and stuff like that. Like, if he knew that they were there, it just complicates things in a way that is really confusing. So I'm kind of hoping that by subjects, he means someone else. If you want to lay out your theory in the comments down below, that would be amazing, and I'll definitely give those a read. And if this turns into something bigger with the next GK Cypher, I mean, I'd be a very happy man. I'd love to sort of put my mind back in the old headspace of the BO3 zombie story for a bit, but right now with stuff going on in BO4, there's not really been a reason to, but I'd love a kind of change to that, I suppose. So thanks for watching, guys. Massive, massive thank yous and congrats to all the folks that were involved in the solution here, and just generally in the cipher solving community and the zombies community. This stuff makes me so happy. So I'm just happy to be here and conveying this great news. Thanks, guys. Drop a like if you've enjoyed. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.